Okay, so I got the bearings, as you can see right here. Some fresh bearings, and I'm gonna install them and have this engine put back together. Yep, that's the right bearing, fits over the crankshaft, nice and smooth. Here, I'll just compare them to the old bearings real quick. Here are the old bearings. New bearings versus old bearings. Can definitely tell they're different. This one has smaller balls than this one does, but the size of them and everything stayed the same. Yeah, this one has a little bit of play in and out, but up and down there's no play. This one has a lot of play in and out, and it has play up and down, which is why even though this has oil in it, you still hear it. But this one, you don't hear it. And then this one had either the race, I think it's a race. The race melted actually when I was taking it out of the engine, so it's seized up. And then this one obviously is fine because it's brand new. This is the front bearing, and a part number right there. This is for the Protect Samurai, but it basically fits every .21 engine, because every .21 engine uses the same collet, so it's gonna fit around here, and then it's gonna be the same width, and outer diameter is usually gonna be the same. The rear bearing is where most variation happens. Like Novarossis sometimes use 14.5 millimeter, and the most common is 14. Some SH made engines use 13, but these Works and Sirio and Orion engines use a 14.2 millimeter, which is a good thing I checked, because I thought this thing is just a regular 14 millimeter crankshaft, but it's not. I changed my mind. I'm not going to use the Novarossi carb. I'm going to use this Alpha carb off the Trackstar engine, just because I like how easy these carbs tune, and I know them well. I don't know the Novarossi carb very well, so yeah. I'm going to go put these bearings in the freezer, and then I'll get back to you once they're ready to go into the block. Okay, so I've had the bearings in the freezer for probably about half an hour now. So now I'm just gonna use a heat gun, heat up the block, and I'll go grab the bearings from the freezer and toss them in. Hopefully it all goes smoothly. This. Put this the other way. That's in there. Oh, it popped right out. Okay, so that definitely wasn't the smoothest bearing installment, but bearings are in now. You see, we got our front bearing right there, and our rear bearing. Just gotta let everything cool down. So basically what happened was, you can see it in the video, I got the front bearing in, no problem. That slid right in very nicely. And then when I flipped it around and I went to put the rear bearing in, as I pushed in the crankshaft, the front bearing just popped right out. So, those are smooth. But the front bearing just popped right back out, and then the rear bearing I couldn't get in all the way. So, I tried a little bit more to get the rear bearing in, but got to a point where I was like, okay, I'm not getting this. So I just stopped. I went and I put this front bearing back in the freezer, and then I put it in. So I put it on there like that. I pressed it in, and then I have a 1 inch by 1 inch piece of wood that I used to just tap it in the rest of the way. And then once that was in there, then I threw in the crankshaft like this, and then I gave the block, or I then put a collet and a flywheel on here, and I started screwing down this nut. And once it got snug, I gave the block a little bit more heat, grabbed the flywheel with some channel locks, and I just cranked down the nut until I couldn't anymore. And I could feel it as the rear bearing got pulled into its seat. So that's basically how I pressed in the rear bearing. But, yeah, now it's in there. Just gotta let it cool down, but it is very, very smooth. Spins free. I will put some oil in the bearings, but it's very, very smooth. Spins very freely, and there's no sound from the bearings, so that's good. See you once all this stuff cools down. Okay, so it's still a little warm, but it's cooled down a good bit, so I'm gonna just put some oil in the bearings. Make sure you get the oil down in the front bearing. Okay, and then I'll switch to 3-in-1 oil. I just use that good bearing oil for the bearings. Just coat the crank pin. Coat all of this over here. Real nice and smooth. And then the bushings and the upper bushing. You never have too much oil. I mean, you can have oil to the point where it doesn't want to start, but it's not hard to flush out the engine. So just oil up the outside of the sleeve a little bit, and then the inside. Give that a good amount of oil. And that goes in. Okay, that's in there. And as you can see from my repinch, it pushes out the sleeve right there. So next is a back plate. Just oil up the O-ring. Make sure that has a good seal. piston up. That snaps on really nice, so I know that has a good seal. And head button, I marked where the exhaust is. I have my shims. Oops, I'm gonna put it that way, like that. I tried finding some other screws because the Sirios have flathead screws. I tried finding some other ones, but the threads on these screws are different, so. You always want to oil your screws so that way they don't seize. You can use anti-seize. I should probably get some, but or some liquid wrench or something. So that's on there. This guy. I go in a cross pattern, and I usually go until it snugs, and then I back it off just a little bit. And I'll for one snug, so around the sun up. And the 4 times I go. And I'm still with much. Seems like these this done. Right now. Right now. You want can't be over because this controller is the best. Yeah, and I have I think it's really like 200 factors, but I'll get that. Sorry. And I'm good. I just need to pictures. Some I got with it, some I got with it, some I got with it, some I got with it. Practice one to some and one the rest. And then a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. Listen. Don't need to stay head button. Just yeah, be easier. That's on there. Okay, career. Sorry, 2 0. Okay, so my phone ended up dying. It didn't really miss anything important. I just put the carburetor on, and then I decided to put the exhaust on. So here's the alpha carb on there, and then I'm using this Hypex EFRA 2034 pipe. This pipe is very, very good. Has very good top end, and the engine is very responsive and good on fuel. So hopefully that pipe works good with here. I'm gonna just go ahead and set this carb to my factory settings that I know that these alpha carbs break in well at. So I usually start with this high-speed needle flush, and then I'll go out one turn, usually 1.5 turns like that, so it sticks out just a little bit. And then this low speed, I'll go till it's flush, which is right out there. And then looking at it, I'll go out 1.5 turns there. And then my idle, I kind of just guesstimate with this, about a 1 millimeter idle gap, because these settings are super rich usually with this carb. So oops. So I'll go to a 1 millimeter idle gap, and then that will usually be good enough to start with. So yeah. So this is something I do to test my repinches, to make sure, or to check the tightness. So I take this little 2.5 millimeter screw. I just screw them on. And take my electric screwdriver, which has a clutch system. This is a cheap $25 electric screwdriver, so it's not gonna have a stupid amount of torque. So I set it on 2 first. See where we're at. Okay. So the engine turns over no problem at 2, which means this is going to be very very quick and easy to break in. That's without a glow plug, but with the glow plug, it doesn't make too much of a difference usually. From what I've seen and tested and stuff. So yeah, that is the revived Sirio .21 rebuild done. All that's left is just to run it. So it is currently a Tuesday, and I'll be running next Sunday, or this coming Sunday. So we'll see what it does then.